The story begins with the simple life of John and Alice, a married couple who, despite living modestly, always seem happy. John is a friendly man. Every morning, as he leaves for work on his old bicycle, he always greets the neighbors with a warm, "Good morning." His presence brings a small spark of joy to the community. On the other hand, Alice doesn't just sit around. She also helps earn a living. That day, she was getting ready to apply for a job at a company with full confidence, hoping luck would be on her side. Unfortunately, Alice's hopes were crushed. Her job application was rejected, and she returned home feeling disappointed. Not long after, Arnie, their landlord, came to collect the rent. He looked at Alice in a strange way, as if he had some kind of ulterior motive. When John came home, Arnie kept acting foolishly, as if he was trying to tease them. That night, John and Alice attended their high school reunion at a big party. At first, the atmosphere seemed fun, but not for Alice. She immediately got annoyed when she saw one of her high school classmates, someone she used to hate, dancing nonstop. Meanwhile, John ran into Ricky, an old friend. But instead of being friendly, Ricky refused to shake John's hand and looked down on him just because he seemed poor. Alice, on the other hand, met her good friends, Louise and Chuck. The three of them greeted each other warmly, hugged, and caught up. That night, they got lost in the party atmosphere, laughing, drinking, and dancing, all to momentarily forget their simple lives. The next morning, John and Alice talked about Alice's job interview. In a sad tone, Alice shared that she had failed to get the job because her competitor was a much stronger candidate. As just an ordinary college graduate, she felt she couldn't compete. However, their conversation was interrupted by a shocking incident. A large truck nearly crashed into them, but luckily they escaped unharmed. The police quickly arrived to handle the situation, warning the truck driver about the safety signs that were often ignored in the area. During the tense moment, Alice found herself fixated on an elderly woman who was picking up a teapot at a nearby house. Without thinking twice, she ran toward the house. Inside, she was greeted by the old woman, who turned out to be selling antiques at very low prices. Alice was immediately drawn to a teapot. When the old woman left to answer the phone, Alice searched the house for the teapot until she finally found it behind a door. For some reason, she felt like she had to have it. Realizing she didn't have any money, she recklessly decided to steal it and quickly ran off. She immediately told John to step on the gas without explaining anything. On the way, John was confused by Alice's panic, but when he saw the satisfied smile on her face as she kept staring at the teapot, he realized what had happened. Instead of getting angry, John just shook his head and let Alice enjoy her happiness, even if it came from something she had stolen. The next day, bad luck struck John. At work, his boss harshly scolded him for what was deemed poor performance. Without any further discussion, John was fired on the spot without a single penny of severance pay. He felt devastated and lost, afraid of disappointing Alice, who had always supported him. Meanwhile, at home, Alice was busy making phone calls to apply for jobs. Multitasking, she was also straightening her hair. But accidentally, the hot flat iron touched her skin, making her wince in pain. In the middle of the stinging sensation, her eyes locked onto the antique teapot she had stolen the day before. For some reason, she felt the urge to open it, and what happened next left her speechless. Thousands of dollars poured out from inside the teapot. Curious, Alice decided to try something. When she intentionally hurt herself, this time by hitting a kitchen cabinet, more money came out than before. She realized that the more she inflicted pain on herself, the more money the teapot produced. It was as if there was a strange connection between pain and the appearance of money. John came home with a heavy mind, but he was shocked to find the house in complete disarray. Red liquid was splattered across the floor, making him fear that something terrible had happened. Panicked, he ran to the bedroom and found Alice lying on the bed. But his worry vanished instantly when she calmly sat up. "Why are you home so early?" Alice asked casually. Still confused, John explained that he had just been fired from his job. Filled with guilt, he apologized to Alice, afraid that he wouldn't be able to support them anymore. But Alice's reaction left him puzzled. Alice pulled out the magical teapot and handed it to John. "Forget that small paycheck. This teapot is more than enough," she said with a wide grin. She explained that the teapot produced money whenever they hurt themselves. Skeptical, John assumed Alice had just hidden money inside the teapot, but she assured him they were too poor to have that much cash. That night, John spent hours thinking. While Alice was asleep, he took the teapot and decided to return it to the old woman who owned the antique shop. He didn't want Alice to keep hurting herself for money, but unfortunately, the shop was closed, and he had no choice but to bring the teapot back home. A few days later, John appeared on a local TV show for an interview. He shared the story of how he had discovered the teapot, of course leaving out the strange details. The interview caught the attention of a man named Dr. Ling, who seemed to know the origins of the teapot. Dr. Ling immediately set out to find John's location, intending to take the teapot for himself. Meanwhile, a collector offered $5,000 to buy the teapot, but John refused, believing it was too valuable to sell. He returned home and made a deal with Alice. They would use the teapot until they had collected 1 million, then stop before things got out of control. With the money they had gained, their lives slowly began to change. They started improving their appearance, getting haircuts, skincare treatments, and even fixing their teeth. But Alice's greed started to show. For her, the money still wasn't enough. She wanted more than just money. She began wondering if the teapot could produce something other than money. In her mind, a crazy plan started to take shape. A few months after finding the magical teapot, John and Alice's lives had changed drastically. However, behind all the luxury, Alice started acting strangely. John didn't realize that his wife was becoming increasingly obsessed with using the teapot to generate money, even if it meant hurting herself. One day, they invited Alice's family over for dinner. At first, everything was fine, but when John started bragging, his mother-in-law became irritated. She asked sharply, "What kind of job do you actually have? How is it possible for someone like you to make this much money?" Calm but slightly arrogant, John replied that he was now running an investment business in chicken eggs, claiming it was highly profitable. But his mother-in-law remained suspicious. "You still look like a bum, John. No investor would ever trust you," she scoffed. Even though her words stung, John didn't care. What mattered to him was that they were no longer poor. The next day, while John and Alice were enjoying some time together, there was a sudden knock at their door. When they opened it, 2 Jewish men immediately attacked John, demanding the whereabouts of the antique teapot. They claimed to be the grandsons of the old woman who had originally owned it. "Where is the teapot? We know you have it," one of them said while ransacking the house. Terrified, Alice tried to lie, saying they had already sold it. But when they demanded proof, she finally grabbed some money from under the pillow, the money generated by the teapot, and handed over 5,000 to them. Before leaving, one of the men warned, "That teapot is dangerous. It can ruin your life. Don't ever think of this as a game." The warning made John and Alice curious. They decided to learn more about the teapot at the library. There, Alice discovered a horrifying fact. The teapot had a dark history. Pictures of its previous owners showed them dying in gruesome ways due to their obsession with it. However, Alice deliberately tore out that page so John wouldn't find out. To her, the most important thing was staying rich, no matter the risk. Over time, their lives became even more luxurious. They bought a huge house, luxury cars, and jewelry. They even threw extravagant parties to show off their wealth. However, the changes started affecting Alice's personality. She became arrogant and forgot about her old loyal friends, including her best friend who was still struggling in poverty. Unlike Alice, John remained humble and treated everyone well, regardless of their wealth. Not long after, a man named Dr. Ling from China showed up at their house. Dr. Ling claimed to be interested in the antique teapot and asked for permission to enter their home. John wanted to let him in, hoping to learn more about the teapot. However, Alice suspected that he was trying to take it from them. After a discussion, they decided to lie, telling him that the teapot had already been donated to a museum. Dr. Ling warned them to be careful and to listen to him before it was too late. But Alice refused to listen. To her, the only thing that mattered was keeping the teapot, no matter what. That night, their peace was once again disrupted. Ernie, their former landlord, arrived drunk. He seemed amazed at how quickly their lives had changed. But his curiosity soon turned into reckless action. Ernie tried to snatch the teapot from Alice's hands. Ernie ran off with the teapot while Alice and John chased after him in a panic. Alice was convinced that Ernie wanted to steal the teapot for himself. The tension reached its peak, and the mystery of the magical teapot was about to unfold. Alice was extremely anxious when the magical teapot seemed damaged after all the strange events that had happened. However, when she picked it up, the teapot returned to its original state, as if nothing had ever happened. John, seeing this, could only shake his head, feeling increasingly uneasy about the bizarre occurrences surrounding the object. After that incident, they decided to meet Dr. Ling and bring the magical teapot with them. Dr. Ling calmly explained that the teapot had existed for over 2,000 years. Throughout history, it had changed hands many times, often ending up with greedy or malicious individuals who were ultimately destroyed by the teapot's own power. According to him, the teapot couldn't be destroyed, but it could be hidden to prevent it from harming anyone else. John, who was starting to feel that the teapot was too dangerous, asked Dr. Ling for advice on what they should do. However, Alice immediately rejected the idea of giving up the teapot. She believed that Dr. Ling only wanted it for his own benefit. Alice was convinced that she and John were good people, so they could surely control the teapot's effects. That night, after they returned home, Alice was awakened by suspicious noises. She woke John up, and together they checked the house. It turned out that 2 Jewish men who had visited before had broken in and stolen all their money. John tried to fight back, but failed. When Alice appeared holding the magical teapot, the 2 men looked panicked and terrified. However, one of them still attempted to take the teapot. In her anger, Alice struck one of the men with the teapot, causing them to flee in fear. The next morning, Alice woke up on the downstairs floor. As soon as she regained consciousness, she let out a hysterical scream upon realizing that all their money was gone. Days passed, and the money they had accumulated from the teapot was running out. Alice began to lose hope, while John, unable to bear the situation any longer, once again tried to harm himself by picking up a hammer, but this time he couldn't go through with it. That night, John looked for another way to make money from the teapot. He deliberately started a fight outside the house so that people would beat him up. To John, being hit by others felt better than hurting himself. Alice, witnessing the incident, showed no concern. The next day, Dr. Ling came again and warned John that the teapot was slowly destroying their lives. However, Alice still didn't care. Alice discovered a new fact when, by chance, she saw someone fall off a skateboard nearby, and the teapot suddenly started spitting out money. Alice then realized that they didn't have to hurt themselves. Just seeing someone else get hurt was enough for the teapot to keep producing money. With this idea, Alice started bringing the teapot to places where she could witness painful things. She went to boxing matches and other places where people were subjected to violence. As a result, their wealth came flowing back even more than before, making Alice greedier. However, Alice's nature began to turn cruel. One day while driving, Alice deliberately almost ran over someone crossing the street, just to make sure the teapot would give out money. John, seeing Alice's behavior, was horrified and tried to stop her, but they ended up having a huge argument. When Alice angrily said she wanted a divorce, suddenly the teapot started spitting out money, scattering it everywhere. Alice was shocked to learn that hurting someone's feelings could also make the teapot work. Seeing this, Alice intentionally started being rude to John, and the teapot kept pouring out money non-stop. John, realizing how the teapot worked, finally understood that this object wasn't a blessing, but a curse that was slowly destroying both of them. At home, Alice and John continued their strange practice, hurting each other's feelings to activate the magical teapot. To them, hurting feelings seemed much safer than physical harm, which clearly came with a lot of risks. They began doing ridiculous things, exposing neighbors' secrets or even close friends, like revealing a carefully hidden affair. The result? The teapot kept printing money without stopping. However, even though their money was overflowing, Alice felt it wasn't enough. She had another plan, to visit her sister and expose a big secret, that the baby her sister had given birth to wasn't her husband's child. Alice immediately took John to her sister's house, and the atmosphere became tense as John started a serious conversation. Alice's sister looked nervous, her face pale with worry that her secret would be revealed. But when the moment arrived, Alice suddenly stopped John. She couldn't bring herself to hurt her sister's feelings, so they decided to end the visit peacefully. After that incident, Alice confessed that she wanted to make this the final step to make money from the teapot. She asked John for one last bold request, to kill a drug dealer she knew. According to Alice, killing an evil person like that was justifiable. At first, John hesitated, but after being convinced, he finally agreed, though with a heavy heart. John committed that this would truly be their final act. While digging the grave for their target, John suddenly stopped. He felt like Alice had turned into someone he no longer recognized, a cruel person, possibly influenced by the evil power of the teapot. Alice tried to reassure John, but he gave her an ultimatum: choose him or the teapot. Firmly, Alice chose the teapot. Disappointed, John decided to leave Alice there and walked to Dr. Ling's house to find a solution. Dr. Ling explained that there was no easy way to stop the teapot's power. It only reacted to people who were evil or weak. The only solution was if Alice voluntarily gave the teapot to Dr. Ling. However, if Alice refused, Dr. Ling could only wait until they were both destroyed and someone weak took the teapot, an endless cycle. On the other hand, Alice started feeling the bad effects of the teapot. While taking a shower, she was shocked to see her face in the mirror, aged and terrifying. Terrified, she screamed and found a torn book from the library that she had ignored earlier. At that moment, she saw John standing outside the window. John tried to wake Alice up, urging her to stop all of this before it was too late. Panicking, Alice promised she would give up the teapot. But John still didn't believe her. To prove Alice's sincerity, John did something desperate. He jumped out of the window, hoping Alice would choose him over the teapot. Seeing John fall, Alice ran to help him, proving that she had truly changed. Alice chose John, not the teapot. After everything calmed down, they both decided to free themselves from the teapot's influence. However, that night, they were awakened by the sound of a burglar alarm. Someone had broken into their house. It turned out to be Ernie, who had managed to steal the magical teapot. But strangely, John and Alice felt relieved. They were finally truly free from the teapot's influence. Still, John was worried and intended to warn Ernie about the dangers waiting for him. The next day, John and Alice went to Ernie's house to make sure everything was okay. They knocked on the door several times, but there was no answer. After trying to open the door, they found it wasn't locked. Their curiosity pushed them to go in. Once inside, a terrifying sight greeted them. Ernie appeared to have hurt himself, as if he knew the dark power of the teapot all too well. But what was even more horrifying was Ernie's wife. With wild eyes and an expression of madness, Ernie's wife pointed a gun at John and Alice. Ernie's wife seemed to have a crazy plan: to kill them. According to her, by killing, they could get more money from the teapot. The lives of John and Alice meant nothing to her. However, the situation became even more chaotic when two mysterious men suddenly entered the house. They pointed guns at Ernie and his wife, forcing them to hand over the magical teapot. But Ernie and his wife, who had already lost their sanity, refused to give it up. Things quickly turned chaotic. Gunshots rang out and everything ended tragically. Ernie, his wife, and the two men were killed on the spot. The room was left with lifeless bodies and money scattered everywhere. John and Alice, though shaken, took the teapot and immediately brought it to Dr. Ling. They knew that only Dr. Ling could end the curse. Dr. Ling received the teapot with relief. He thanked John and Alice, even calling them the strongest people in history, for managing to break free from the teapot's grip. Meanwhile, the story continued with Louise, who was checking her mailbox. Louise was completely shocked when she found a check for $250,000 from Alice. The money was given as business capital, making Louise incredibly happy alongside her friend Chuck. Alice and John resumed their lives as usual. This time, they used the wealth they had left to help their less fortunate friends. Alice, now heavily pregnant, seemed to be enjoying her new life with John. So what happened to the teapot? Dr. Ling kept his promise. He took the teapot out to the middle of the ocean by boat and threw it to the bottom of the sea, ensuring no one could find or use it again. The film ended quietly, leaving behind the message that greed only brings destruction.